What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and it's Saturday, which means it's time for a last-minute starts and stats video for Week 11. This is where, if you're scrambling right now, you got players on bye, whether that's Bucky Irving or whether that's Cade Otton, or maybe you just lost Sam Laporta to injury, and you're looking for a last-minute fill-in for your lineup, this is the video for you. We're going through 8 starts and stats. These guys are all outside the top 30 at their position, guys that I really like this week, where if you're in a pinch and you need a spot start or a desperation flex, this is the video for you. So as always, if you enjoy, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen, she gon' let me.
Now again, just to be clear, the premise of this video is these players are all kind of dumpster diving starts. If you have, somebody very good, or let's say you have a Deebo Samuel in your flex. None of the guys on this list, I am telling you to start over Deebo Samuel, okay? Players that are real, guys that go in your lineup every single week, do not bench them for a player on this list. This is, again, if you're in a tough spot, or if you are into DFS, or if you are putting in bets for the weekend, these players are fun as well. And I will say, shout out to Underdog Fantasy. They keep the lights on in the basement here. Make sure you use promo code RON when you sign up. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. And if you're a new customer, they will have an Aaron Rodgers. Shout out to the Jets. I don't know, I don't know what the picking process is, but it's the Jets this week. Rodgers higher than 0.5 total yards. That's the whole point. He will most likely get to that number, and it gives you a free head start on your pick 'em entry. You can go and check out college basketball, NBA, football, all of that good stuff on the pick 'em lobbies. You can go over to the Battle Royales, which is, these players are good for that as well. The kind of like DFS style weekly drafts that they do. Those are fun as well. Make sure you check those out over Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code RON. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. Now, our first player here is Jameson Williams. We're going to start, this isn't anything too crazy, but he has been a little bit shaky since returning from injury, or not injury, no, he's suspended. People still don't really know what the substance was. I've heard whispers that it was like Adderall. I don't know what the substance is, all right? So I'm actually going to chill on even speculating here. But yeah, so he came back last week, 5 targets, 3 catches, 53 yards. He did have that one really difficult catch. He gets sandwiched across the middle for a 170, 180 pound guy. Super tough to hang in there and take that hit. But I want to give you the confidence. If he's been on your bench and he's been quiet, he hasn't given you a great week since week 6 now. I think this is the week to fire him up. All right, I have him as my wide receiver 31. He's going to be at home versus Jacksonville. Only +1, like the +1 here. And I will say, the way that this video works, we have player cards here. It's just kind of a written breakdown for you guys to see. If you want to pause the video and just read through it, you absolutely can. But the +1 is just how higher I am than consensus. So consensus does like Jameson Williams this week. I'm not going to artificially raise him up in my rankings, so it's +6. This is just where I'm at. Consensus is on him as well, but I do want to give you the vote of confidence to start Jameson Williams. Now, he's going to be at home versus Jacksonville, which is a great environment, as the Lions have the highest implied total of the week at 30 points. That's how much Vegas is projecting them to score. The next highest is like 27. So the Lions are going to score points this week, and the Jaguars are the perfect matchup as they run the 3rd highest man coverage rates at 39.1%, which sets up perfectly for Jameson Williams, who is 3rd among all wide receivers in yards per out run versus man coverage, with a 4.41 yards per out run versus man. That is via fantasy points, which has really cool data. That's pretty insane. And then when they're not in man, this is how detailed fantasy. I don't even have like a partnership with Fantasy Points. I just think that they're a great site. When they're not in man, they run cover 2 a lot, right? The zone coverage, cover 2. Running a league high 29.2% cover 2. Jameson Williams crushes that as well with the 3rd best separation score versus cover 2. Sadly, they don't have yards per out run versus each zone coverage, but they do have separation score, which is just kind of their, are you getting open? Are you sitting down in the soft spots? Which he is. So he crushes everything that the Jaguars put out there. And the Jaguars also allow the 6th highest rate of explosive pass plays and the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So you could see how that would benefit Jameson Williams. Big plays, all the coverages they run, he exploits. And then also, he was at 80% plus of the routes last week and a 20% plus target share last week, fresh off of his suspension. So there was no dip in his usage. He just didn't get home. Again, 5 targets is pretty dang good. And then you also have no Sam Laporta this week. no dip in usage, beautiful matchup where the Lions should score points. I do love him as an upside wide receiver 3, and he has like top 5 on the week upside where you could look after this week wraps up, and Jameson Williams had, like 28 points as like the wide receiver 3 on the week. Now, moving on from him, we have, this is still not super, super deep, but I do love this matchup. The Saints versus the Browns. The Browns going in to, I want to say it's the Superdome, which is a really nice environment. I have Jameis Winston here as our second player and Cedric Tillman as our third player. It should be Cedric Tillman, not just Tillman, but you guys get the point. Jameis is my QB 16, Tillman wide receiver 21. Not all that higher than consensus at +1 for both, but I do just love this game. You have the Jameis Winston revenge game narrative where he comes from the Browns. He was drafted by Tampa. He went to the Saints, then he went to the Browns. I don't think there's any bad blood there, but you of course know that Jameis Winston's going to want to show out at the place he used to play at in the Dome. He is very, used to this environment. And this is a Browns team that has the second highest neutral pass rate. So in neutral situations where it's not garbage time, they are passing the ball a ton. And this could be a classic Jameis game. This could be a 300-yard, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks type of game for Jameis, which I really like. I have him as, again, the QB 16, so a fine streamer. And he is rostered in just 8.2% of ESPN leagues. That is a guy that's pretty much free. Now, Cedric Tillman, I am as a fine wide receiver 2 in this matchup as well, since Jameis Winston came in week 7, right, where he replaces a Deshaun Watson who tore his Achilles. Cedric Tillman is behind just Jamar Chase at 22.2 points per game among wide receivers, and the Saints have allowed the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and they've lost Lattimore since then. So they are probably inside the top 10 in terms of being the easiest matchups for wide receivers. And the Saints also run man coverage at the 8th highest rate, 33% of the time, which sets up well for Tillman, who has a 2.42 yards per out run versus man compared to 0.98 versus zone. So kind of Jekyll and Hyde there, but this is a team that runs man, doesn't have their man coverage corner anymore in Marshawn Lattimore, and it should be a nice matchup for Cedric Tillman where you can honestly play him over some of the big boys. If you got a DJ Moore out there, like big names, not really the big boys, but there's big names out there that you might be scared to put Cedric Tillman ahead of. Again, there's only 20 wide receivers I would play ahead of Cedric Tillman this week. He is a really, really nice start. Now, let's get a little deeper here. All right, let's get into the RB30s range. Now, if you guys, if you sit down to rank running backs, after the first 26, it gets really, really rough. But I do like Gus Edwards. I have him as my RB31 at home versus the Bengals. That's 3 spots ahead of consensus. Now, last week, he had 10 carries, 55 rushing yards on 25% of the snaps off of his injury. We should see another week off of that injury, those numbers to go up, or maybe his snap share goes up to 40%. We see him get maybe 12 to 15 touches. And Cincinnati looks better on paper than they are against the run. If you just look at raw fantasy points allowed, they're 15th, which is league average, but they have the 7th worst rush EPA defense in the NFL, which again, EPA is just, if it's 4th and 2 and you convert, that shows up huge in EPA, whereas yards, 2 yards on a carry isn't good. Same thing with the goal line. So it's contextualizing yards with touchdowns and first downs. Now, the reason their fantasy points allowed is about average is because Cincinnati allows just 11.1% target share to running backs. That's not by design. I think that's just because their secondary isn't great. So why would you take the check down when somebody's open downfield? So it's creating this environment where the running backs aren't catching passes against the Bengals, which sets up poorly for PPR running backs. Now, that doesn't really make J.K. Dobbins a bad start. He's not really known as a PPR guy, but I think that you're going to see, 10 plus carries for both of these running backs. Now, between the tackles, the Bengals have allowed the 5th most rushing touchdowns, the 7th worst EPA per rush, and the 6th worst rushing yards over expected allowed in the league, and their opponents are passing the ball at the 7th highest rate in neutral situations. They are running the ball. I wrote that wrong. It should be their opponents also have the 7th highest neutral run rate, if that makes sense. Now, or am I pulling that? Let me actually double check that. But regardless, this was via NFL Pro. It should be a matchup that should kind of, stoke some flames from this Chargers offense and kind of set up a nice game environment for everybody involved. I do want to double check the neutral pass rate allowed here if I can. Let's see. So the Bengals are allowing in terms of their opponents, their opponents have the 7th lowest neutral pass rate. It says highest there, but their opponents are passing the ball 56.1% of the time, the 26th highest in the NFL in neutral situations. I believe I am reading that correctly. Now, when we move past that, I have Gus Edwards, as a RB3 that should be in the mix for 50 rushing yards, maybe a touchdown, and someone you can put in there if you are truly, truly desperate at RB2. He is rostered currently in just 25.3% of ESPN leagues, so he might be out there on waivers if you need a spot start, right? If you have like Chuba Hubbard and he's now on bye, or Bucky Irving or Rashad White, and you just need a running back, Tyrone Tracy, Gus Edwards, you could do much worse than him. Then after that, we have our 5th player. Our stat start here is Ricky Pearsall. He is my wide receiver 38. He's at home versus Seattle. I have him about 2 spots higher in the consensus, but I want to give you the confidence to start Ricky Pearsall, right? We talk all the time, rookie wide receiver upside. They score points on the back half of the season, and I think part of that is also having the balls to start them during that stretch of the season, because you might look here and it's like, man, Pearsall, I don't know, maybe I should just go with somebody else in this range and just sort of play it safe. This is when, if you're debating between a bunch of fringe guys, like you're between Pearsall and like Odunze and like Romeo Dobbs, I think I would just rather fire up Ricky Pearsall for that upside. As of right now, since he's returned from injury, he leads San Francisco in slot snaps at 36, and his 11.4 points per game is roughly a wide receiver 3 over that stretch. Now, he gets another chance to cash in on his rookie wide receiver upside against a Seattle defense that allows the 6th highest target share to the slot and the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers. This is via fantasy points. So they're actually pretty weak against the slot, not even just in general, which is where Ricky Pearsall is going to be operating. And you have the extra out that he has been taking a lot of handoffs and carries, and they just want to get him the ball in space. Now, this is an underrated environment with the Seahawks having the 2nd highest pass rate over expectation and both teams being in the top half of the league in plays per game. So even though the San Francisco 49ers don't play fast, their defense is so good that they get off the field, and then all of a sudden San Fran gets the ball, maybe gets an extra drive compared to average. Then on the other side, you have Seattle, who's going to run so up-tempo and so many pass plays that they're going to get a lot of plays on the field as well. And we could see, maybe not a shootout, because I don't think that we're going to see like a ton of points, but we could see a ton of plays, which is nice, especially for somebody in Ricky Pearsall, where we kind of just want the PPR upside. Can he get to like 6 catches? That would be huge. So I have him as like a fine upside flex in a game that will be a competitive matchup in a stacked division. You have to remember, again, this NFC West division right now, everyone's within like half a game. So these games matter a ton, and we should see both of these teams playing super hard. And he's only rostered in about a third of ESPN leagues if you need a desperate spot start this week. Then our 6th player is another running back. Now, I want to preface again, these running backs, super, super tough. Again, once you get past the top like 25, you're talking about backups, right? Gus Edwards behind J.K. Dobbins. Then we have Zach Charbonnet here behind Kenneth Walker. I have him as my RB36 on the road versus San Fran in this same game, 3 spots higher than consensus. Now, I don't mind Zach Charbonnet for this reason. The Seahawks are 6.5-point underdogs on the road. This is going to be an up-tempo game for them where they are coming from behind and passing the ball a ton, right? This could be a 50-plus pass attempt game, or maybe I'll say 40-plus pass attempt game for Geno Smith, which would be really nice. Now, San Fran, yes, they're a good defense, but they're not as stingy against the running back as you would think. They're allowing the 13th most fantasy points to running backs and the 5th highest target share at 18.3%, again, from fantasy points. So they're actually allowing a lot of those running back targets underneath. And the last time Seattle played San Fran, Seattle running back saw 9 targets. Now, the issue is 8 of them went to Kenneth Walker. Now, this is, of course, a Hail Mary spot. We could again see 8 targets to Kenneth Walker, just 1 to Zach Charbonnet. But when you look at the games that they've played together, both of them healthy, pretty much Kenneth Walker gets about like 1.7 targets for every 1 Zach Charbonnet targets. We can round that to 2 to 1 ratio. If there's another game where there's 9 targets to the running backs, instead of being 8 to 1, it would be more like 5 to 4 or 6 to 3. And if Charbonnet can get 3 to 4 targets, mix in a couple carries, maybe see a goal line opportunity, all of a sudden we're cooking with something here where he can give you like 12 PPR points in the RB2 spot. That's what I would be hoping for. Again, I'm not rushing to play Zach Charbonnet anywhere. I'm just saying if you are truly down bad, he's not a pure handcuff. I think he's someone that can benefit from this game script. Now, moving on from running backs, we have a really good tight end start here. We have Hunter Henry, who I've been loving this year. We drafted a ton of him. And this is a really good spot. He is my tight end 9 at home versus the Rams. He is 2 spots higher than consensus in my rankings. And this game is a dream for the Patriots receivers who thrive versus zone coverage. The Rams are 4.5-point favorites, leading the Patriots' need to pass to win. So they're going to be playing from behind, relying on Drake May, which is really nice. Now, the Rams run zone at the 5th highest rate, 74.6% of the time, and allow the 2nd most fantasy points per drop back in zone coverage. This is, again, via fantasy points, which is nice, right? Where they're allowing a lot of fantasy points versus zone, but they're also running a ton of zone. And this is where Hunter Henry makes his bread and butter. He is the tight end 11 in games with Drake May over since week 6, and he leads the Patriots receivers in yards per out run versus zone coverage during that stretch at 1.93. So to me, he is a fine tight end 1 versus a Rams defense that is allowing, again, the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends. So a lot of zone coverage, a lot of weakness at linebacker versus tight end matchups, right? I think we saw Jonnu Smith have a pretty decent game versus these guys last week. And I think that Hunter Henry is in business to give you like a nice, Jonnu Smith didn't do great, but he did have, 3 catches, 45 yards. That's fine, I guess. But I think that we'll see, 12 to 15 PPR points for Hunter Henry, I think is in his upper range of outcomes in this game. And if you just lost Sam Laporta or Cade Otton to a bye, or I'm trying to think, I think that's about it. Hunter Henry, not a bad guy to pick up. I think he's still available in like 40% of ESPN leagues, so not widely available, but he might be hanging around out there. And then our last player, this is dumpster diving, all right? This is a warning. I put it at the top here. This is a desperation flex start, but we're talking about Calvin Austin. He's my wide receiver 47 this week at home versus Baltimore, 23 spots higher than consensus here. This is desperation. This is a part where we're looking at a lot of desperate guys, right? We're looking at like Rashad Bateman's in this area and Christian Watson's, guys who aren't even a lock to run, 70% plus of the routes. I know Bateman has been, but they're going to work Deontay Johnson in here very soon. Calvin Austin, if you need a prayer, I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. All right. He's going up against a Ravens defense that is allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers right now. And he just came off a game where he saw a season high 24% target share with Russell Wilson. He also has the 2nd highest amount of explosive receptions for the Steelers. I don't know why I'm losing my voice here, but he has 5 explosive receptions for the Steelers, the 2nd most on this team behind George Pickens, versus a Ravens defense that is allowing the highest amount of explosive pass plays in the NFL at 12.8% of the time via Sam Hoppen over on Twitter. So you have an explosive guy who's getting a lot of targets here, going against a defense that is going to allow a lot of explosive plays. And Calvin Austin operates out of the slot. So yes, Mike Williams is working into the rotation, but that should be taking away from Van Jefferson much more than Calvin Austin, who's more of a slot receiver. Now he's going to have probably anywhere from like 50% to like 75% of the routes, which is scary, but he has had 4+ targets in each game with Russell Wilson this year. So if he can convert on 2 or 3 of those, one of them being a big play, maybe a 30-yard touchdown, that would be absolutely massive. I do think that this is somebody, again, it's a prayer, but it wouldn't shock me if he got to like 15 PPR points this week or like 12 on the low end with like 20+ point per game upside, or not point per game, but just 20+ points upside. I think a couple weeks ago, he already had 20 points with Russ. Yeah. Versus the Giants 3 weeks ago, he had 3 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown, which I think is very possible in this game. If he gave you 3 for 50 and a touchdown, it would not shock me one bit. Boom bust. He's rostered in just 1.6% of ESPN leagues. Again, do not start him over Deebo Samuel. Don't do anything dumb. But if you are down horrendous, I do think you can do fine with Calvin Austin in the flex. But that's going to do it for us today. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, shout out to Underdog Fantasy. They sponsor the channel. They keep the lights on down here in the basement. Make sure you check them out. Use promo code ROUND to match your first deposit up to $1,000. But if you're already on there or you can't support there, you're not in a state, just leave a like, subscribe if you're new. Helps the channel out a ton. And I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like